Hello, welcome to my channel, Edible Thoughts Makes. My name is Stephanie, and today I have a featured finished project video for you. In these videos, I like to go over all the details of a specific pattern that I have recently made, and I try to keep these videos 30 minutes or less. I go through all the pattern specifications, so details about construction and things like that. The information is all stuff you can access prior to purchasing the pattern if it is a paid-for pattern, and that way I don't give away any secrets. And then I go through my process, any modifications that I have made, my yarn choices, my color choices, things that worked, things that didn't work. And then at the end, I go through some styling options on how I plan on wearing the item, because shortly after I have completed the item is when I record these videos. So oftentimes I haven't worn it that much yet, but prior to casting on the project and while I am making it, I'm thinking about all the ways that I want to incorporate that item into my life. In the description box below this video, you will find links to designer, yarn, and sewing patterns and things like that I didn't mention here. Sewing items, just a heads up, are not on Ravelry, but I do use Ravelry for my crochet and knit items. As always, closed captioning is provided here on all of my videos. You can click on that CC button. If I speak faster or slower than your preferences, YouTube allows you to adjust the speed. So today I am highlighting the Coffee Date Sweater by Samantha Guerin. All right, the pattern specifications. This sweater is a drop-down shoulder worked top down. So you can try it on as you go, which is a great way to be able to assess fit if you are maybe not as seasoned of a garment maker and you just want to be able to try it on. Or also for those who are very seasoned in garment making, sometimes top down is still a preferred method. It doesn't really matter. It's more so that if you are newer to garment making and don't know what measurements you prefer in like body circumference, body length, maybe armhole depth, things like that, being able to try on the project as you go can help you assess a better fit. You start with casting on the back of the sweater first at the shoulders, and then the left and the front shoulders are picked up from the cast on edge and worked flat for shaping the front neckline. The shoulder, front, and back are worked flat to achieve the armhole depth, and then the body is joined in the round to work down from there. Sleeves are picked up and knit straight downward. There's no shaping in the sleeves. And then you have two options for the neckband. There's a folded over neckband version and a flat, and both are worked in a 1x1 rib. Instructions are provided for both of those options. And then your body hem, your neckband, and your sleeves are all worked in a 1x1 rib. And a tubular bind off is what is recommended in the pattern for the finishings. When selecting a size, the Coffee Date is intended to be worn with 4 to 8 inches of positive ease. So the measurements that are given in the pattern are for your finished chest circumference. So then for your chest measurement, add anywhere from 4 to 8 inches and use that number to then select which size of garment to make. Of course, you can pick whatever ease you want. Just know that if you adjust, then your fit afterwards may be different from what the designer initially intended for it to fit like. We have 9 sizes here with a finished circumference of 32 inches to 64 inches. Yarn used in the designer's sample has 2 yarns held together. They held Sonder Yarn Company Sunday Morning Luxe Sport, and that is a Blueface Leicester Masham Cashmere blend. And they held that with Sonder Yarn Company's Halo Yarn, which is a mohair silk. And with those 2 yarns together, they achieved a gauge of 19 stitches by 30 rows in 4 inches of the patterning. What I really like about Samantha's pattern here is that the gauge swatch is written out in the patterning of the garment. That's really helpful because if you end up knitting a stockinette swatch and then your pattern is all in a different pattern repeat and there's no stockinette anywhere, that stockinette gauge swatch is not really going to help you out. Definitely recommend swatching the way the designer has intended for you to swatch, which is in the patterning in this texture repeat of the pattern. This is definitely a gauge swatch you're going to want to block. So that means you want to soak it in water the way you would wash your final garment. Because it is an all over ribbed texture, it's going to bloom and relax, and you're really going to want to see what that fabric looks like afterwards to not only measure your gauge for your stitches and your row gauge, but also just to see if it's a fabric that you like. There are multiple needle sizes recommended. For your main fabric, they recommend using a US 6 or 4mm needle. And then for the neckband, it is recommended to use a US 4 or 3.5mm needle. And for the hem ribbing, it's recommended to use a US 5 or 3.75mm needle. And then for the sleeves, she recommends one needle size up from the body fabric, which is then a US 7, 4.5mm needle. And then the cuff ribbing is recommended a US 4, 3.5mm needle. I did mine a little bit differently from the pattern. I mostly used the same needle sizes. I think I might have done my neckband ribbing slightly different, but I will talk about that in the process and modifications section. The techniques used in this pattern are long tail cast on, picking up stitches, backward loop cast on, tubular bind off, seaming, and of course knitting and purling. There is a tutorial given for how to seam a folded hem. A disclaimer, I did not watch that tutorial because I've done multiple folded hems before, so I just did it the way that works for me. You can purchase this pattern on Samantha Guerin's website or in her Ravelry store, and it is $9 USD. I forgot to mention earlier that it was published January of 2025. On to my process and modifications. So we're going to start with my swatching and choosing of the yarn. So when this pattern came out, I thought that it looked really fun and interesting. I like the construction. I'm not usually drawn to all over textured garments only because I enjoy knitting the stockinette in the round, but I thought this texture looked fun and it wasn't super complicated. It is this alternating broken rib kind of situation. I don't know if it's technically a broken rib. I liked how it looked structural yet not super hard lined, and I love the idea of it, called Coffee Date, and I just imagined this being a garment that I could throw on easily for a casual coffee date with a friend, or maybe you're going into the grocery store and the air conditioning is blasting, or you have to go into the refrigerated or freezer section and it's cold, but it's summer, so you're not really wearing woolly sweaters because it's very hot and humid outside. And I just wanted something that was really comfortable and I could bring on road trips with the family, and it would be comfortable wearing on an airplane, in a car, on a train, on a bus, anywhere. I wanted it to be something that I could just wear anywhere. So in the fall, I was swatching for this project, and I think I made like 3 or 4 different swatches. I just wasn't getting the fabric that I wanted. I will show you my swatches here. I have 2 of them here. So the first one is here. I chose Patton's Classic Wool Worsted. It's 100% non-superwash wool, 194 yards for 100 grams, and this is my swatch using US 6 4mm needles. It's a beautiful fabric. However, the stitch gauge is 21 stitches for 4 inches instead of 19 stitches, meaning it's too dense. And I did not want to go up another needle size or 2 in order to try to meet gauge. I think one of the issues I ran into here is that because it's 100% wool, it has a lot of memory, a lot of its elasticity, and being kind of a ribbed texture all over, it wants to scrunch back up. So if it wants to scrunch back up, that means more stitches per inch, not the fabric I'm looking for, and I like this swatch, but it's not going to work for the garment. And then I also swatched using a sport weight 100% Peruvian Highland wool. It's the Pearl Soho Good Wool, and I held that with Pearl Soho Tussock silk mohair. It's a pretty lightweight lace weight mohair. Some mohairs will be a little thicker than others, but this one's pretty light. So I held that with the sport weight yarn, and my fabric was way too gapey. I pulled it out. I did not keep it because it was not something that I liked. And so I did not want to go down another needle size to try to even match gauge because I wasn't matching it on US 6 needles either, and it was gapey. So that just wasn't going to be a good combination. It was nice and drapey and airy, but it also didn't have great stitch definition, and I felt like with something that's all over textured, I did not want it to look confusing. I did want there to be some stitch definition. So that was out. So this is my third swatch. I used some leftover Pearl Soho plein air from another project. This is 218 yards for 100 grams, 67% merino, 33% organic cotton. And this is knit on US 6 4mm needles per pattern. And I did achieve the gauge of 19 stitches by 30 rows. I love the stitch definition, I love the softness, I love the drape, and I enjoyed knitting with it in this pattern repeat. Here's the tag for the plein air yarn. Here's the colorway Tawny Owl. I believe this yarn is a 2-ply. I don't find it splitty at all when I'm knitting with it. You might experience some hand fatigue depending on how long you are knitting, only because the cotton will not have any elasticity. And so being a cotton merino yarn, you do have some give. It is so soft, but again, with the cotton in there, you will lose some of that elasticity, so your hands could potentially get a little more tired as you are knitting, but I found it really enjoyable. I didn't have any issues. In fact, I have multiple garments knit in this yarn, and I love them all. I think this is my first garment knit with all over texture in this yarn, so I'm curious how it will wear over time. I tend to find that the softer the yarn, the easier it is to pill, and this is a very soft yarn, and it does pill some. I had an experience when I wore a cardigan of mine that's knit in this yarn. It's all stockinette fabric. And I had a backpack on that had like a mesh paneling in the back, which creates way more friction than you probably want on a hand knit sweater. And so the lower back portion of that sweater it was beyond pilling. It was like, I don't want to say destroyed, but it was not great. And I did end up being able to depill it, and once I wet blacked it and washed it again, it actually looks just fine, and I don't even notice. I think if I looked really closely, I could probably see it. However, that could just be me imagining what it looked like prior and panicking and thinking I ruined my sweater. That's just kind of a heads up. But again, that backpack had a mesh paneling in the back, which creates all sorts of friction. It would be essentially like I was wearing sandpaper on my back and rubbing it all over my sweater, which is not a good idea. So that's what happened with that one. This I've only worn a couple of times. I haven't noticed any significant pilling. I think there's some maybe slight fuzziness in the underarm section, but nothing that would indicate a ton of wear and tear per se. But again, it's only been recently finished, so we'll see over time how it wears. The other thing I forget to point out, but I've kind of alluded to, is because this yarn is cotton merino and there's less elasticity, it works really well in this pattern because I don't want my sweater to shrink back up. I don't want it to look super bumpy because of the ribbing. And I think if you choose a 100% wool yarn or something super bouncy, it may not relax as much and parts of it might want to cinch in. Like you might end up with a more accordion effect in the body and the sleeves if the fabric just naturally wants to bounce back in or pull back in. And so it was really important to me to find a yarn combination that was comfortable to wear, comfortable to knit with, but also would block out in a way where the fabric wouldn't want to kind of cinch back in on itself and create that pineapple shirt look. Do you remember, I can't remember which decade this was popular in, but there was this shirt that would be like super scrunched up, and I think it might have been like a polyester or nylon material, but it was created by all this like ruching kind of texture everywhere, and it would be this tiny little shirt, but when you put it on, it would stretch out but still have like this bunching effect everywhere that was intentionally bunchy. I think it was a pineapple shirt. If I find a picture of it, I'll put it here on the screen, but that it was not my intention for this sweater. I did not want that. I wanted it to block out and be not flat, but not bunchy. I don't know how else to explain it, and I feel like I'm rambling now, but hopefully it made sense, or maybe a little bit of sense to you. So it was really important to me to find a yarn combination that worked well with this pattern in the way that I envisioned it. Then I ended up with this beautiful finished garment, and you may notice it's a little different from the original pattern. I'll have a picture of it here on the screen that I added extra colors. The yarn was generously provided to me by Pearl Soho for this specific project, and I am so grateful, and I love this so much. My main color is Tawny Owl, and it's this beautiful sandy caramely brown. And then one of my contrast colors is Heirloom White. That's the undyed colorway. I believe it's undyed. And then the blue is this beautiful dusty blue called Blue Chambray. And I cast on the 3rd size, which gives me approximately 7 to 8 inches of positive ease, so I'm within the recommendations. And then my main fabric here, I did use a US 6 4mm needle, and then for the neckband and my cuffs, I did use a US 4 3.5mm needle. And for my sleeves, I had picked up on a US 7 as recommended, but my fabric was too gapey, so I just went back down to a US 6, but I did pick up for the next size up in my sleeves, just in case it did end up getting a little tighter, knitting on a small circumference. So overall, I knit a size 3, but for my sleeves, I picked up for a size 4, just to account for a potential gauge difference. And I have not measured the gauge again, I just know it fits well, so it worked. For my hem ribbing, I don't believe I went to a US 5. I think I still did it in a US 4, just like all of the other ribbing that I did. And I definitely blocked it out pretty boxy in the body section because I did want all of the ribbing to open up there. However, for the cuffs and the neckband, I kind of smushed those together because I did not want those parts to be blocked out fully. In fact, for the cuffs, I actually added in 2 rounds of elastic thread near the edging of it because I figured this section would easily get stretched out, and I wanted to make sure that it would cinch back in, and I didn't want it to flare. Because this yarn is cotton merino, the merino will have elasticity, but the cotton will not. And so just knowing that I'm going to be pulling my sleeves up a lot, I wanted to make sure that if I pulled them up, they would stay up. And if there wasn't the elastic thread on there, it would end up stretching out, not being able to stay up, and just end up flaring some. So I just added 2 rounds of that elastic thread. Hopefully it is visible here. And I don't feel it at all when I'm wearing it. I actually put them in prior to wet blocking the entire garment. That way it would just help ensure that that shape would stay a little nicer there. I may end up going in and putting elastic thread into the edging of the body hem, not necessarily to cinch it in, but just to keep it from flaring. And I think that would add a little bit of stability, and I'll just do 2 rounds of it. Basically, I start at my beginning of round, and then I go all the way around by picking up just the right leg of that inside stitch, or the wrong side. And then once I get to the beginning of round again, I'll just go down 1 row and do the same thing. And then when I get back to the beginning, I'll double knot it and just weave those ends into the ribbing. And you can't see it at all on the right side, and it just adds a little bit of stability to that part of the garment. So with my ribbing, I wanted to add in a little bit of retro flair by adding in stripes, and I did do a knit round at each color change. That way you don't get that purl bump blip in the color change, so it creates a very tidy transition. And I wanted to do the cuffs, neckband, and the body hem all slightly different, and I really like how it turned out. So for my neckband, I just did 2 little stripes here. For my cuffs, I did 5 rounds of the main color, 4 rounds of the white, 3 rounds of the blue, 4 rounds of the white, 6 rounds of the main, and then I did an Italian sewn bind off on all of my finishings, minus the neckband, because the neckband I did a folded neckband. And then for my hem, I did 5 rounds of the main, 5 rounds blue, 5 rounds white, 5 rounds blue, 5 rounds main, and then a sewn bind off. For the neckband, you go back and pick up the neckband after you've completed the front and back sections. And I did 5 rounds main color, 3 white, 2 blue, 3 main, and then 13 main for the inside part. So instead of binding off and then whip stitching the stitches, or just picking up a stitch from the inside and knitting that together and binding off, this time I used a 16-inch circumference needle, and I picked up the inside using a US 3, a smaller needle, just to make it easier to pick up the stitches, so that I would make sure I had the right number of stitches that I wanted to bind off together with my live stitches. Otherwise, sometimes I feel like by the time you get to the end, it can be a little wonky or skewed. So this way I knew I had a 1-for-1 lineup of my stitches before I started the process of doing that. So then I folded over, and basically you knit the 2 stitches together and then you bind off. So it's like a 3 needle bind off. And then I did the bind off with a US 8 double pointed needle. I probably could have even gone up to a US 10, but it does fit over my head just fine. And it does add some stability to not stretch out too far, but it does go over my head. I can even put it on with my glasses on. If you're really concerned about it being too tight, you could go up to a US 9 or a US 10 double pointed needle to do that 3 needle bind off. I want to show you how tidy the pickup from the back and the front shoulders are. I just love how the ribbing lines up exactly, and it is such a tidy pickup there. I'm very happy with my sleeve pickups. I really enjoy when a texture has different directions on a garment. I just think that looks really fun. It's great visual interest, and even though they are going in different directions, I don't feel like it's an awkward break in the patterning or distracting in any way. I'm just so pleased with how this turned out. I did shorten the body length by maybe 2 or 3 inches. In my opinion, it is a very long full-length sweater, like past full length. However, knit it to whatever length you want. So I did shorten it by 2 or 3 inches, just kind of a heads up. I think I knit the ribbing to the recommended lengths. My sleeves are definitely long. In the pattern, they're pretty long as well, and so they fit me really well. This is the length I like them at. Also, I know over time, with just bending of the arm, these sleeves will stretch up a little bit, and I definitely don't want them too short. My good friend Andrea of the Knitting PT has called it elbow tax, which is a great phrase because yes, just over time, bending your arms, the fabric is going to end up being eaten up a little bit at the elbow section, and the sleeves end up shrinking up. So when I knit them a couple inches longer than I think they should be at, it usually ends up being great over time. But just a heads up, the pattern is written with longer sleeves and a much longer body. All right, we are on to the styling portion of this video. So in this section, I try on my finished item with a few different pieces, a few different ways I plan on wearing it, different looks, different energy, just different ways that I think it might work for me. So currently, I'm wearing it with a pair of black pants. I did not sew these, probably could, but these are ready to wear black pants that are a linen, cotton, lyocell blend, I think. So very drapey, elastic waisted, super comfortable. If I wanted to tuck the front, I could, but it's super comfortable. I have a black t-shirt on underneath, and I feel very comfortable today. This morning it was, I think, 35 degrees Fahrenheit, and I felt comfortable wearing this outside without a jacket on. I wasn't outside for very long, but I did feel comfortable without a jacket on. And yeah, so I think this is something I could easily wear, throw on some tennis shoes, and out the door I go. One thing I forgot to mention are my earrings. These are by Birdie Parker. They have this coppery knit stitch fabric in the center medallion piece. I purchased these a few years ago at Zombie Knitpocalypse in Rochester, Minnesota, where Birdie Parker was a vendor, and I just love these earrings so much. All right, on to the next item. Okay, I swapped out the black loose pants for a pair of fitted jeans. I think this looks really nice. The length of the sweater is long enough that I don't feel like I am limited to high-waisted pants or skirts. and I have a little more versatility in that way with this garment. So here it is with a pair of jeans. I think fitted or wide leg would work. Maybe I'll go swap out for a pair of wide leg jeans. I've swapped out the fitted jeans for a pair of wide leg jeans. The wide leg jeans fit a little more like trousers. They are very high-waisted and they are more fitted in the hips and then go straight down into wide legs. I feel like this goes really well together as well. Super easy to wear. I could potentially tuck the top in, I think, if I wanted to. Since this is a high-waisted pair of jeans that isn't too loose in the waistband, so it would hold the front tuck if that is something that I wanted. It would show off the drape of the sweater nicely. Okay, I think I have one more item to share with you. And before I put it on, I'm just going to show you what it looks like on the hangers. This is a set that I sewed up maybe last summer. I think I never mentioned the date here on the video. It's middle of May, year 2026. So I sewed up this set last summer. This is a Fabulism fabric, Swedish holiday, maybe something daisies. I can't remember. I'll put it here on the screen. The top is a cropped sleeveless top called the Ashton top by Helen's Closet. I love it so much. I've sewn multiple versions of this top, and there are 2 different options for finishing. I really like how this looks. And then I self-drafted a tiered gathered skirt to go with it, and I paired it with this brown linen. And so for the pockets, I lined that with a brown linen. I think this would be really fun to wear with this sweater. I could wear the tank underneath, and then when it got too hot, I could just take the sweater off. So we're gonna try this combination. This is so comfortable. Definitely go spring, summer, early fall. I'm so excited. It is so fun. If I got too hot, I would just take the sweater off and I could tie it over my shoulders or around my waist. I feel like this looks really nice. It also still keeps my shoulders warm, but there's a little more breathability because I'm not wearing the garment. And I feel 0 itch with this sweater, by the way, in case anybody is super sensitive. I feel like it's super soft, feels cottony. I don't feel like there's any itchiness at all. Again, I've made multiple garments with this yarn, and so those have been worn a lot more often than this just finished one. I don't feel like there's any itchiness going on with those garments, but yeah. So that is everything I have to share with you today on my coffee date by Samantha Guerin. I love how this sweater turned out. I'm so excited about getting lots and lots of wear out of it for years to come. I hope to have cleared up any potential questions you might have had about the pattern. As always, if you have pattern-specific questions, please contact the designer for pattern support. I hope you gained some inspiration on color combinations, things that you can do to a sweater to really make it your own and personalize it. I hope I gave you some ideas on putting outfits together that make you feel really good and feel like yourself. I think a lot of times we get into ruts on what we like to put together. Sometimes it can feel kind of blah, but there's so much we can play with for texture, for color, for shapes, for patterning, all sorts of different things. And if we try it on and we don't like it, that's fine. We just take it off and try some other combination. I just think it's so much fun to be able to mix and match and play and maybe find pieces that we're missing in our combination of things that we want to make or we want to look for to fill that gap in however way we want to dress to feel good about ourselves. And something that's really important to me is dressing for me. I feel like when we dress for ourselves, we can feel more comfortable, we can feel good about ourselves, we can feel more confident, we can feel whatever type of energy that we want to feel, whether it's whimsical or more serious or really any sort of mood that we're looking for. And I find that so empowering and important, and the fact that we can make our own clothes to make ourselves feel the way we want to and to make them fit the way we want to is so exciting. So with that, cheers to being creative. I hope you're doing well, taking good care of yourselves, your loved ones, and your neighbors, and I will talk to you next time. Bye!